Right back at it. I love it.
Under 10.
Clark fires. Hits. Caitlin Clark doing it all.
The All-Star break is over. Real basketball is back. And what comes next for the Indiana Fever has the potential to be the most significant and consequential stretch of competitive basketball Caitlin Clark has played since arriving in this league. Because everything that has been building across the first half of this season, every controversy, every coaching question, every minutes restriction debate, every historic individual performance delivered in limited floor time, all of it is now pointing toward a second half that could define this franchise's trajectory for years to come. Let us be direct and completely clear about what the opportunity actually looks like heading into the Indiana Fever's first game of the second half against the Seattle Storm. Because the stakes deserve that level of clarity rather than cautious hedging. The last time Clark faced the Seattle Storm, she dropped 45 points with a double-double and 10 assists. Let that number sit against everything the broader sports media conversation has been generating about her limitations, her efficiency concerns, her minutes restriction, and her competitive ceiling. 45 points, 10 assists against this exact opponent. And she is coming out of the All-Star break looking healthy, moving with the kind of athleticism and shooting rhythm that has been gradually returning throughout her managed comeback. And by all visible indications, she is ready to play basketball at the level this moment demands and this second half requires. The second half of this season is where everything either comes together or it does not. That much is established and clear. The schedule intensifies, the competition becomes more serious, and the questions that have followed this coaching staff and this franchise all season long are about to be answered in the most direct possible way, which is by the actual results that emerge from how this team is deployed, how it competes, and whether the organizational decisions reflect a genuine understanding of what this roster's actual strengths are and who its actual engine is. Let us start with the single most important factor in determining whether Indiana makes the kind of second-half run its talent suggests is possible, and that factor is Stephanie White, and whether she will make the coaching decisions that the evidence of this entire season has been demanding. This is not criticism manufactured without foundation. This is the honest, analytical conclusion of what the first half of this season has demonstrated in observable and documented terms. When Stephanie White allows this team to play Caitlin Clark's style of basketball, when she puts the ball in Clark's hands and empowers her to be the primary decision-maker and the driving force of the offense, this team becomes genuinely special. The offensive efficiency numbers from those stretches reflect a team operating at a tier that most opponents in this league cannot consistently defend. When White departs from that approach, when she falls back on alternative offensive structures that limit Clark's decision-making authority, the results have been inconsistent, frequently frustrating, and well below what this roster's talent level should produce. The dynamic between Clark and Kelsey Mitchell has been one of this season's most compelling and most complicated subplots, and it deserves honest examination because it directly affects what Indiana can actually become in the second half. There is a version of this Clark-Mitchell backcourt partnership that is genuinely formidable. Mitchell is an elite scorer. She will put the ball basket whether she is running isolation sequences or operating as a movement scorer off the ball. The evidence from stretches of previous seasons under different coaching is clear on this point. When Clark is dictating the offense, when she is running pick-and-roll actions and making decisions at the point of attack, Mitchell benefits directly and significantly. She gets backdoor layups created by Clark's gravity. She gets open threes off Clark's passing reads. She gets catch-and-finish opportunities that her athleticism allows her to convert at high rates. The two players together, in the right organizational framework and with the right coaching commitment, are a matchup problem for any defense in this league. The challenge has been achieving that version of the partnership consistently. Mitchell's instincts as a primary scorer sometimes pull against the ball movement and off-ball activity that Clark's system requires from everyone around her. When those instincts override the system and Mitchell gravitates toward isolation play while Clark is on the floor, the offensive spacing collapses and both players end up operating below their actual ceiling. The solution is not complicated to identify. It is, however, apparently difficult to implement, and the implementation falls entirely on the coaching staff. The direct and simple version of what Stephanie White needs to do in the second half of this season is this: put the ball in Caitlin Clark's hands. Let her run the offense. Trust that when Clark is making decisions and Mitchell is committed to playing off the ball and moving without it, Mitchell is still going to score at a competitive rate because she is genuinely talented enough to do that. And eliminate the structural decisions, the hub offense elements, the unnecessary ball handling by players other than Clark when Clark is on the floor that have been limiting Indiana's offensive ceiling throughout the first half. The specific instruction is observable and clear. When Caitlin Clark is on the floor, the offense should run through Caitlin Clark. When Clark is resting and Ty Harris is managing point guard responsibilities, different structures can reasonably apply. But do not impose the organizational framework designed for Clark's absence on the possessions where Clark is physically present on the court. That single distinction, properly applied, could transform what this Indiana team looks like over the next several months. The second factor determining whether this Fever team makes a genuine second-half run is the health situation surrounding Clark, and specifically whether the minutes restriction that has been defining her role continues in the second half, or whether it finally gives way to the unrestricted deployment her physical condition and her competitive performance both appear to demand. The evidence of what she produces in restricted floor time has been genuinely staggering. 45 points and 10 assists against the Storm earlier this season in limited minutes. 27 points against the Connecticut Sun in 27 minutes just before the break, a performance where observers accurately noted she would have approached 40 or 50 points with a full allotment. The sample of what this player generates in managed time makes the case loudly and clearly for what she would produce with 33, 34, 35 unrestricted minutes against opponents who have been spending 2 seasons figuring out how to limit her. She is listed as probable for this opening post-break game. She is going to play. The question that defines everything about this second half is whether Stephanie White demonstrates the coaching willingness to let Clark play the extended minutes that her health and her competitive output both justify. If the answer to that question is yes, the rest of this league needs to genuinely prepare for what is about to arrive. The third factor is bench production. An honest assessment requires naming both what has worked and what has not. Ty Harris has been providing usable, quality minutes off the bench. When she is paired alongside Clark or Mitchell in various lineup configurations, she has contributed as a functional backup guard in ways that represent genuine progress. That is real, and it deserves acknowledgement rather than the dismissiveness her earlier usage patterns generated. Sophie Cunningham continues to be the most reliable perimeter scoring threat Indiana has beyond its starting lineup, and her ability to connect from three-point range at a high rate creates the floor spacing that Clark's offensive system fundamentally requires. These two players represent Indiana's genuine bench offensive contributors. The honest assessment beyond that is less generous. Raven Johnson has not demonstrated the shot-making reliability that would make her a trusted offensive contributor in high-stakes moments. Maisha Hines-Allen is not a scoring creator. Michaela Timpson brings genuine athleticism, defensive energy, and finishing ability around the rim, but she does not generate offense through her shooting. The realistic picture of Indiana's bench scoring depth is that Cunningham and Harris are the players who can be trusted to put the ball in the basket with any consistency. That is thin. It needs to be maximized, and it means both players carrying significant responsibility in the second half whenever the starting unit rests. The fourth factor is defense, and this is where the most uncomfortable, honest assessment lives, because the evidence from the first half does not generate optimism without significant improvement. Indiana's defense has been porous enough throughout this season to consistently surrender scoring outputs that genuine postseason contenders cannot survive allowing against the best offensive teams in this league. The fast break points allowed have been excessive. The individual defensive breakdowns that create open looks for organized opposing offenses have been too frequent. The collective defensive discipline, the help rotations, the willingness to sacrifice individual positioning to maintain team defensive structure has not been consistent enough to trust when the competition level elevates to what the second half schedule is going to present. That schedule includes Olivia Miles and the Minnesota Lynx, who now have Nafisa Collier back in the lineup. That development makes Minnesota a genuinely formidable competitive force. The Aces will appear again. The Valkyries will appear again. The upper tier of this league's competitive landscape is going to be the regular environment of Indiana's second half, and the defensive performance from the first half is not sufficient to win consistently against those opponents. The standard is not that Indiana becomes a defensive identity team. That is not realistic, given the roster construction and the offensive identity this franchise is built around Clark's playmaking. The standard is that the defense becomes functional and solid enough to keep Indiana competitive in games where the offensive production runs below peak levels. When Clark has an off shooting night, when Mitchell is not connecting from the perimeter, when Boston is missing her finishes around the basket. In those games, can the defense be cohesive and disciplined enough to keep Indiana within competitive range until the offense finds its rhythm again? That is the achievable target, not elite, solid and functional. And it requires more collective defensive communication, more consistent help rotations across the full defensive scheme, and more genuine investment in team defensive structure from every player on the court. That last point connects directly to the finishing conversation, which deserves its own direct acknowledgement because it affects Clark's statistical production and the team's offensive ceiling simultaneously. Clark is creating open looks for teammates at an elite rate. The passing reads are correct. The passes are accurate and well-timed. What is not happening consistently enough is the conversion of those looks at the close range where the defensive position should all but guarantee a made basket. When Billings finishes her layups reliably, when Timpson converts her athletic finishes around the rim, when Boston makes the short-range opportunities that her $6 million salary represents the expectation of making, Clark's assist numbers reach a completely different tier because the created opportunities are actually being completed. The infrastructure for extraordinary Clark assist production exists. The finishing needs to match what the passing is creating. This Indiana Fever team has genuine championship-level potential in the second half of this season. The Las Vegas Aces have shown vulnerabilities throughout this year and do not project as an untouchable dominant force. Minnesota, with Collier's return, represents perhaps the most serious competitive threat in the league, and any authentic championship conversation will likely require Indiana to compete directly with that team at some point in the postseason. But Indiana has the personnel and the talent to compete with both of those franchises if the organizational decisions finally align with what the evidence of this entire season has been demanding. Clark is healthy. Her shooting range is back. Her movement is back. She is coming off an All-Star weekend where she competed with genuine effort, publicly called out the players around her for not meeting that same standard, and demonstrated in real time exactly what her values look like when she has a platform and the willingness to use it. The second half starts against Seattle. The coaching staff's decisions in the weeks ahead will determine whether this team becomes the thing it is actually capable of being, or whether it settles for something meaningfully below its ceiling, because the same organizational patterns that defined the first half continue unchanged. The talent is unquestionably there. The individual star power is historically significant. The potential for a second-half run that reshapes the entire narrative of this season is real, and it is within reach. What happens next is a choice. And the choice belongs to Stephanie White.